it by giving notice or after 5 years, but always better to have a termination clause, because long-term contracts at times can get, because nobody knows what will happen in future. No? So moving on. So why is it that contracts are important in business? I think it's a no-brainer. Any business involves making offers, accepting offers, making promises, and performing those promises and obligations. Therefore, it is important that every business enters into into contract, and it is, as I said earlier, the whole idea that let's not have a written contract. That's something which should never be encouraged. People do it for various reasons. For some people, it's comfort. They say that, oh look, I know this person very well. Why should it looks a little odd to sign a contract with for example, when say let's imagine two friends out of college, they decide to join together and start a business. First thing they should do is have a founders agreement, have an agreement, but they don't do that, unfortunately, because it's all on trust. And yeah, trust is good so long as everything is fine, but yeah, so this is something which so I'm just going to deal with a very few typical contracts which any new business will have to deal with, we will have to enter into. First, of course, is if you are going to start a business, you may have to take a premises on lease or something. Therefore, you need to have a lease deed, which nowadays I think it's also now the law also requires that it is necessary to have something in writing. So that's something that you need to do. The other thing, very important, is a founders agreement. It could be a partnership agreement or just a founders agreement which clearly says what each one's role is, and it defines it very clearly. It could be something which you may find it difficult to put forth to your friend or acquaintance, but then it is very, very essential in the long run, because you're looking at, when you start a business, you're not looking at today. Once upon a time, I was also part of a startup. So we had the first thing we did when we came together. Of course, we were lawyers to that extent. We knew the importance. We first thing we did was, even before we found a place for our office, we sat down and wrote the contract between us, although we knew each other very well. So that's very critical. Uh, the other kind of contracts which you will probably enter into is, of course, NDA, non-disclosure agreement, is one which is very, very important in today's day and age, because you could have an idea which probably has not reached a stage where you can patent it. So there are a lot of ideas which you can't patent. It's just a business idea. And if you are allowing, say, an investor to peep into that and understand that, it is very important to have a non-disclosure agreement. The other thing is, say, IP licensing. Whether you are taking a license of an IP or you are giving a license, there again a formal agreement has to be there. Again, if it is an IP, you need to look at exclusivity there. That could be very critical. What I've seen is a lot of businesses, they have a good IP, they give an exclusive right to somebody at a very, very less rate, and then they're stuck with that. So that's something which you should avoid. Then you have your typical vendor agreements, which, like you said, you would have supply contracts. Those are regular, but these are essentially the contracts that a business would enter into in the first few years of business. Yet another contract is the investor agreement, the agreement that you enter into with the investor. Now, what I have seen is that mostly those are the contracts which are always one-sided, because the investor comes with a battery of lawyers. They basically thrust the document on the company, and because he's bringing in the money. I'm not saying that it happens in all cases. I'm saying I've seen those cases. And because the money is coming in, and you want the business to grow, you sometimes make that wrong decision. Like I said, that is where the negotiation, at that negotiation table, you need to say that, okay, if this is not working out for me, it's all right. They want the promoters to be not part of the board. They want one promoter to exit. People go and sign such contracts. You need to be very careful. Therefore, you need to be sure what is it that I am getting here and what is it that I am giving. Goes back to rights and obligations, like I said.
For this, what kind of processes do you have to have in between advisor?
Yeah, that's of course. Yeah, employer-employee relationship. The employment contract is something which I missed out. That's again something you should certainly have with all your employees, which would basically, set out things. It will cover confidentiality. It will cover the aspect that the employment can be terminated by both parties by giving notice. So I have seen very simple employment contracts, which I would think is ideal for any startup. You don't even need to have a formal document. You can have the terms of employment covered in the acceptance letter, and you can just say that you are employed. This is your designation. This would be your pay. You would be entitled to this kind of an increment, confidentiality, non-disclosure. Uh, some people also put non-compete there, which I have my own doubts whether it is enforceable or not, because the law is otherwise. But I find a lot of people put non-compete also. And then of course the termination clause. So this is something which I think, yeah, it's a good point, that employment contract.
But non-competence you cannot put if you are not giving a severance package, right?
No, you can put. I mean, you can put whatever in a whether.
But it won't be enforceable
Correct.
because that person is in that only that area.
Even if you have a severance package, you can't.
For some time you can just disallow, but after that you cannot
Yeah,
enforce.
yeah, that's right. You can't have a contract which puts a restraint on somebody's business.
Yes.
That's the law. But you find that even big companies have a non-compete clause.
But that cannot be enforced.
That's what I was saying.
So that person goes to court.
Correct. Right.
Contact irrespective of delivery. So since okay, I'm paying someone guy for 50,000 per month, and then I'm expecting this is outcome from him in 6-month period or 1 year period. I know that is a plus or minus 3 months deviations and everything, but after 1 year he simply walked out from a company by 3-month notice period. So I'm not able to get. I spend money on him, but I'm not able to get output from him. So how can I deal with this with the contract?
So you are saying that this from this employee you have a particular expectation.
Yes. So every employee, so maybe for a designer, I need to have a good design. So the contract is about 6 months, you need to deliver the design. For the 6 month, your salary is this much, this much, this much. So in most of the employee contracts, what I've gone through is nowhere there is clear between the outputs. It's all about speaking about the salary, it's all speaking about the confidentiality and everything, but nowhere it's never speaking about the outputs and engagement with the company. So what if people is, okay, if they feel very difficult with the target and task, they walk out with 3-month notifications. So it's totally.
Yeah, so it is possible to have. It may not be a typical employment contract which you would have with a normal employee.
Okay.
This would probably be something in the line of a service contract, where the person has to deliver. So it's like delivery linked.
Yeah.
So you can probably make the payment linked to the delivery. So if it is a design which is required to be delivered, you can say, if I don't know how it works. If he has to first give you a first draft, so on giving that you make a
So
payment.
that's totally sort of service. So I just want to include that with the employee contract.
You can do that. So what I'm saying is it is something which you would not normally do in employment contract, but you can do that. You can say that if you don't do it at the end of 6 months, you can provide for a consequence. So like I said, a contract is rights and obligations. So when I say I have a right, I should also know that if my right, I don't get what I'm supposed to get, what is the consequence? So you can say that if you don't perform, I am entitled to terminate, and you will have to pay me so much money. Now, whether somebody is willing to sign on those lines or not is a difficult question. That's a negotiation thing. But you can have contracts. Absolutely perfect to have a contract like that.
So in some contexts, I've seen that the engagement is totally pure on at will kind of things. So how trustworthy, those kind of contracts. So in most of the contracts, one of my in previous company, they said that your engagement with this company is purely not will.
Yeah,
So
it is contractual. Basically, so like I was saying, normally you would say your contract is terminable by giving 1 month notice on either side. You could have at will termination. So long as you have agreed and signed, that is what you have agreed. It may sound unreasonable, but then that's the option that you have. You either sign that contract or not. If you have signed it, then you are unfortunately stuck with it.
Sir, I have two questions basically. For example, we are basically designers and we get usually orders like, let's say a phone manufacturer orders us to design some kind of phone. He does not specifically give the details about it, but then later, after first draft, second draft, he moves our design to existing phone, closer to existing phone. For example, an iPhone. In that, I mean, it might infringe their IP rights. So, in that case, what do we do, sir?
So, what you need to do is in your contract, you should have a clause saying that whatever you do, you are not responsible for he violating IP rights. You are only required to deliver a particular design. So it is up to him to see whether that violates any IP rights of anybody. So you need to protect yourself from that.
And what about the subjective designs, subjective things, sir? So, for example, a design, it can, it is up to someone's likes, right? Same thing can be liked by one and not liked by another person. So, for example, someone asks us to design something and he does not like what we are giving and he keeps on changing it. So, in that case, how do we put subjective clause, sir, in contract?
I don't know how it works in designing, but I can think of another parallel where you are delivering something and the other person has to accept. So the best way to resolve that is have a third party who will sign off, saying that yes, this meets the criteria. So instead of him, because he obviously will say no, this is not all right because he has to pay you. He may want to drag it. But if you have an independent third party doing that exercise, he will say, okay, you have met with these requirements, therefore I am signing off, therefore you will have to pay. So that typically we see in construction contracts, in engineering contracts, where a builder goes and builds, and it happens in government contract. There is a third party engineer who certifies every bill. He does the measurement, he says, okay, everything is done properly, you can release the payment. So something like that you will have to think. See, what is happening nowadays is, every business is throwing up something new when it comes to contracts. So you need to look at parallels and see, okay, whether that fits in. So I think in your situation, a third party signing off maybe probably the closest that you can.
So we have to add that in the
In the
contract.
contract.
Itself?
Yes.
I would recommend something like this one solution you take in charge. I worked as a designer. What we do is that we say, okay, you have to give me a proper document what is prepared from you, and I will execute. If you're not satisfied, I can have this much 3 months vision for this. You cannot have more. Yeah, put it like that means you will have a power over that. That will be easy for you. You can say, okay, I can get it to through 2 or 3, and after that, you cannot you have to pay me more for that. Or else I won't work. Try to include a man-hour for that, so that if your man-hour is included, you can say, okay, I have this much time I work, and you are paying this much. So that is why it takes.
Yeah.
Is the manufacturer going to come? Suppose there are two parties, one is the manufacturer, one is the marketing. Does it actually
Manufacturer, marketing company, and a consumer. Okay.
manufacturer, marketing company, and the consumer. Now, the manufacturer is responsible for making the goods, supplying the goods to the marketing company. The marketing company finds whether the quality of the goods is up to the mark, and then decides to market it to the consumer. Suppose there's a eventuality that comes out from the consumer side, there's a grievance issue. Who would be liable for responding to that grievance issue? The marketer or the manufacturer?
So it will depend on the contract between the manufacturer and the marketing company.
Yeah.
Because typically what would happen is if I were to go to an authorized dealer, or sometimes even not an authorized dealer, but if I go to a seller and buy a product,
Yeah.
even without my knowledge, there will be a contract between that seller and the manufacturer,
Yes.
where the manufacturer would have told the seller that you can give a guarantee on my behalf. That's why he gives you the guarantee card or the warranty card. But if there is no such contract between them, then since your contract is directly with the seller, your option will be to go against the seller.
Okay. Okay.
So it will depend on what they have agreed. But normally in such sales contract, normally there is a understanding saying that you can give a guarantee on my behalf.
Okay. So the manufacturer is taking guarantee for his
Yes,
products.
because as a marketing guy, he is only there to sell
Yeah.
and advertise and sell. So his responsibility is normally limited to that. Unless he has said that he can always tell the manufacturer that I completely cut you off from the responsibility. I take over the responsibility. It is possible to do that.
And one more thing that keeps coming up in various contracts is the location of resolution. So there would be one party based out of Tamil Nadu, the other would be say in Bombay, and there would be again some negotiation going on. The case should, suppose there's a dispute, it should be resolved in Tamil Nadu or in Bombay. How do you respond to such
Yeah,
kind of
so
situation?
I'll come to that because that's the last slide. I
Okay,
thought
okay.
disputes, I thought I'll keep it to the end because nobody wants to dispute.
Thank you.
I thought I'll talk about all good things before reaching there. So I'll come to that. That's a very important aspect also. So like I said, typically there are several contracts, an employment contract, NDA, a licensing agreement and all that. But there is no one formula. There's no one size fit all. Every contract is different. So you need to think through what is it that needs to go into a contract before you sit and finalize the terms. Now, there are few aspects which you can keep in mind, because I was telling you that you can actually do a contract by sending an email. So what is it that you need to have in the contract, irrespective of what it is? I'm not oversimplifying things. There could be contracts which cannot be so simple, but I'm talking about the typical contract which as a new business you will enter into. One is you need to be clear as to what is the scope of work or the scope of service. Now, when I say scope of work, it is not only the product or the service that needs to be given. It needs to mention the timelines. It needs to take into account why you are doing that. The example which I gave you, if I am buying a raw material to manufacture something and supply it to somebody else in 6 months' time, I have a contract with him, because under that contract he says if I don't supply in 6 months, I have to pay him so much as losses, as compensation. But when I do this contract with my supplier, I need to be conscious of that if he doesn't supply to me, I will have a loss of so much. So how do I offset that? How do I balance that? So when you say scope of work, all these things have to be factored in. There could be timeline issues. There could be some contract which would say that, time can be extended. So you want to start production, say 2 months later, you will tell your supplier that give me in 2 weeks. You can provide an extension of, the contract itself will say that the product will be delivered to me on or before this date, and that I can extend it at my sole discretion. I can extend it by another 2 weeks or another 3 weeks. So you can set out these things. The other aspect obviously is the payment mechanism. How the payment mechanism has to work out, because in every contract there is a payment, who has to pay, when it has to be paid. So whether the payment has to come before you do your, if you are the person who is supplying the goods, if you want the payment in advance, a portion of it, you need to specify in the contract that unless the payment is made, I don't have an obligation to supply. So that's something you need to be sure about, you need to specify. The other thing which you need to mention is a termination clause. Now, termination clause can be in a short-term supply contract, can be for specific reasons. For example, I'll go back to the same contract. I am buying raw material because I have to manufacture and supply to him. But if he tells me that I don't want these goods for whatever reason, if he terminates, I should terminate this. I should have that right. So these are things which you need to, if you have these aspects of, for example, if you, let's take an example. I gave you an example of the buying supply contract, why a termination could be necessary. Let's take the example of a lease. You are entering into a lease, you are taking the premises on lease. Now, if the landlord says for 10 years you cannot terminate, I mean, you don't know. Today, your business is probably small. You may grow, you may want to move out of it. Therefore, don't agree to a clause saying that the tenant will not terminate. Always find a reason to, especially in a long contract. Short contracts, termination for specific reasons, like I said, like I gave you an example. So these are broadly the things that one needs to keep in mind as to what goes into a contract. Once you're clear on these things, then your contract is done. You don't have to really think of anything else. The reason being, the law will take care after that if something goes wrong. I was talking to you about the Indian Contract Act. It talks about situations as to what happens if somebody doesn't do something, what is to happen, or if something has to be done in a particular manner, how it has to be done, and how the law looks at it. Therefore, if even in your contract, you don't have to say that if you don't perform, you have to pay me so much. The law will take care. So basically, if you have these, most important is the scope of work. If you know the scope, if you are very clear, and when you're looking at a scope, look at the worst case scenario. I want this, I want him to render this service. What will happen if he doesn't do it? How do I manage? How do I offset? So if you look at the worst case scenario and then draw up a scope in your mind, then you pass it on to whoever is drafting the contract. You will end up having a reasonably good contract, which you can, probably show it to the other party who will also agree to that. Now, so this is what I was telling, essential terms. So if you have these terms on pricing, on the scope, on termination, on timelines, this invariably will take care of most of your simple contracts. Now there are certain rules when it comes to performing a contract, performing a contractual obligation. So when I say performing a contractual obligation, it's doing what is required of you to do under the contract. So I'll just tell you some of the unwritten rules. You don't have, these things will not be there in your contract. One of the rules is that if you have a contract with me that I will do something for you, I can do it myself or I can ask him to do it for you. Unless in your contract you say that no, only I have to do. That typically happens if I, for example, engage a particular architect and say I want you to design. I don't want, because he's probably world famous. Or I go to a person who is an artist or a painter. I say I want a painting. In those cases, obviously he can't ask somebody else to do it. But normal rule is, if you have a contract with me, I can ask somebody else to do it for you.
Sir, actually, in some cases, some person doesn't have GST, billing is not happening from their side. So, as you tell, it will be done by somewhere and then it will be billed on the name of somebody. So whether it is correct or else it will be perpetually right or else it will be against law.
So you're saying somebody has, you have to make...
If I want a product means, there will be somebody doing it for me, but the person having no GST, billing and all. So the person doing the work and he is billing under the name of another person who is having GST, invoices, billing and all. So whether it be perpetually right or else we will, if we made a contract between them means, as you said, he is doing because of him. So is this right?
See, as far as you are concerned, so long as you get your contract will say that if you do, I will pay you
It's
X
like
amount.
Subcontract.
I will pay you so much amount. So long as you get a letter from him saying that you don't pay me, instead of me you pay this person, you are protected. Whether he has complied with the GST law or not, from a contractual point of view, you are protected so long as he tells you that, okay, I don't want the payment, you make the payment. Yeah.
Is a purchase order a contract?
Yes, it can be a contract. So if it is accepted, so it's like I'm placing an offer on you that I want to purchase. If the moment I get a confirmation saying receive purchase order, will deliver, that's a contract. So contract can be anything, you know. Like I said, even an email is a contract.
So the consequence has to be mentioned in the purchase order, or
consequence of
like
what?
if it is not delivered. So let's say there's not. It doesn't say that if it's not delivered, like this should happen, but still it's violated. Let's say, but can we like enforce it in law and say that there were losses because of this, and we want it back, even though it's not mentioned in the contract?
Yes, you can. Even if your contract doesn't say anything about consequences, you can enforce it. I will come to it a little later in the next slide maybe. So that will be in non-performance. Now we are on performance. So one is that, you know, I can do it myself, or I can ask somebody else to do it. Yeah.
In vendor agreement normally, you also put a clause like not to outsource the project, whatever the services.
You can have that clause. If you don't have a clause like that, then he can outsource it. That's the rule. So you can have a contract saying that you are not entitled to outsource. That's valid. Yes. So that's one rule. The other is, let's say we have a contract and I don't even ask him to do it. I'm not performing my part. I don't even tell him. For whatever reason, he does it for you and you accept it. It's done. You can't come back to me and say, look, you did not do it, somebody else did it for you. So you can, the third party can actually do what is agreed. There is another rule which says that if there are two people who have promised to do something, there are two suppliers who jointly say we will supply this to you. You can go against one of them. Between them they may have their own problem, but you can, if say there are two companies, say one becomes insolvent, you still have a right against the other one. So that's another thing. There's one very important aspect of reciprocal promises, we call. So I was giving you the example where, where my doing something is dependent on you doing it. I can give you an example where you're building a house, or where you contract somebody and say that I will supply the material, you bring the labor and you construct it. That's a contract. So he doesn't have to do anything unless I give you the material. I give the material. So his performance is dependent on me performing something. So you can mention in your contract the order of performance. It could be payment related. You can say that I will not supply, or you can say my obligation to supply will come only if you pay me an advance of 10%. Even if you don't say that in so many words, but if it can be understood from the contract that doing this is dependent on that, then the court will not say that you were at fault in not doing it. So that's one thing. Yet another aspect which a lot of people, don't do is, if your counterparty does not do what he has promised, what is it that you should do? A lot of people take it very lightly. They say, oh, he has not done it, let's just forget it. So what you should do is, you should say, I am putting an end to the contract because you have committed fault. You have committed the breach. Because if you don't do it, it's as if you are saying, okay, it's all right. So let's assume you have a contract saying that something will be done on a particular date, and that date for you is very sacrosanct because of various reasons. He doesn't do it. First thing you should do is, you have failed to perform. I am therefore saying that you have committed default. I am terminating the contract. Even if your contract doesn't have a termination clause, you should do that, you can do that, you must do that. Because if you don't do that, it's like, okay, you have not done it by that date, you can always do it later. It will be assumed. So it's a very crucial thing. So if it is something which is very, very essential and he doesn't do it, put an end to it. Then you find a way to recover the losses, compensation and all that. But first you have to say that you were at fault, I am calling it off. The last rule, there are other rules also, but I'm just taking a few important ones. The last one which I want to talk about is what happens when you set a particular time in a contract to do something. Let's say I say that by 1st of August, you will deliver 100 bottles of water for me. And I'm asking you that because I'm doing a party where those 100 bottles are required. So that 1st August date, and suppose that party is on the evening of 1st August. So the 1st August date is very, very critical for this. It doesn't make sense to me if you give it to me on 2nd of August. So what is called is time is of essence. No? So in such a contract, time is very critical, time is of essence. So in a contract like that, where time is of essence, if he doesn't do it, you have a right to call it off. You can terminate, you have to terminate rather, because if you don't terminate, you can't claim compensation from him. If you don't terminate, it will be understood that time was not of essence, and that even if he delivers it on the 2nd of August, you could probably use it elsewhere. That's how the law will resume things. Where time is not of essence, say my business involves doing this catering service or whatever on a daily basis. I give him a date of 1st of August. He doesn't deliver. Even if he delivers it to me on 2nd, I can probably use it in the party which I am doing on 2nd of August. But I may not be able to use the entire 100, I may be able to use only 50 of it. So in such a case, what happens is, if I accept it from him, I had an option of saying, no, I don't want, because time was crucial. But suppose I accept it. Then I can say, look, I am accepting it, but I will claim compensation from you. I can still claim compensation from you. That's how the law looks at, time and how you need to perform your obligations within the time that is agreed. Now that is with regard to some of the rules on, performing the obligations under a contract. Yeah.
What is exactly termination? Like, what has to be done? Like, not accepted or?
So nowadays, because most of the contracts are very formal, it will also say a notice clause. If either party is sending a notice, it has to be sent to this person, to this address, by registered post or by email. So if there is a form mentioned, you do it in that form. You can say that our contract required you to supply these things by this date. You have failed to do it, therefore you have committed a breach of contract. I am terminating the contract. In just 3 lines, but bring out the essence. And some of the rules relating to that. Now comes the question which you were asking about non-performance, claiming losses. So even that is something which is covered under the Indian Contract Act. It has provisions which says what happens if a contract is not performed. So let's go back to one of those examples which we were using of having to buy raw material for producing some other, manufacturing some other product. So the situation can be like this. I contract with you saying that you will give me the raw material at X price. You don't do that. I still have to do my job. I go to him. By then the price has changed. He will say the price is X plus 20 rupees. I have no other choice. I buy it from him. So in law, if you have not performed your obligation and I have gone and purchased from somebody else at a higher price, I am entitled to claim from you the difference in price. Basically, what the law says is that it will put you back to a position to what you will be if the contract was performed. So you will not incur that additional cost. Now this is one way of compensating, which is called the natural, it's a natural thing which happens in any. There is something called a special damages, because although the word used commonly is compensation, in law of contract the word used is damages. So one is a damages which naturally arises, one is a special damage. Now special damage is something which again is something which you can claim provided you have agreed. Going back to the same example, the supply of raw material, the supplier, if I tell the supplier that look, I need the raw material because I need to supply to somebody else, and if I don't supply there will be a consequence, and you don't supply to me. Let's assume you don't supply to me by the cutoff date. Because of that I am not able to perform my obligation. Now I have a much more serious problem from him, because he may sue me for extra compensation because I have failed to do that. Now, in my contract with you, if I have mentioned that, saying that if you don't supply to me, I have a triggering effect because of my contract with him, then if you are aware of that, then I can claim from you special damages, which will be what I have to pay him for my non-performance. So that's something which is called special damages, which is again possible only if you mention it in your contract, if the other party has knowledge of the special circumstances. So that's the special damages. There is something else which is called the liquidated damages. So which is, what happens is, in some contract or in some situation, it is very difficult to assess the loss. So in those kind of contracts, the best thing to do is, at the time of entering into the contract itself, saying that if you don't perform, you will pay me this amount. So it's a pre-agreed amount. It is a party is estimating the loss and mentioning it there in the contract itself. Now there can be situation where the pre-agreed amount could be too huge. Suppose if it is a buy and sell contract and the difference is only 20 rupees, but the contract says you will pay me 1000 rupees. It's unreasonable. In such a situation, what will happen is, when it goes to court or to resolve the dispute, they will see whether that amount is reasonable or not. If it is found to be unreasonable, you will get only what is reasonable. So you will get that 20 rupees. So liquidated damages, if you can estimate it fairly, it is much more easier to claim and get, because if you have to claim regular damages, you have to prove that you have suffered loss, which means you have to prove that you had to go to somebody else and you had to purchase at a higher price. You will have to show all those documents. But if it is a liquidated amount where you have prefixed it, then you don't have to prove that. All that you have to prove is he did not perform, and because of that I purchased from somebody. You don't have to, the burden of proof is that much lesser. So in some contracts it is good to have liquidated damages clause. There are for example, I've seen employment contracts providing for liquidated damages, and there's some contracts, in construction contracts, where there is a delay. You don't do it by this date, for every day's delay you will pay me so much money. For example, if you want somebody to build a house for you or something like that. So that's how you are insulated against non-performance. So as a party who has to perform obligation, you need to be conscious of this as well. If you don't perform, that is what you may end up paying the other party, a compensation. So it is not one-way traffic, it can happen. That is why it is important that you perform a contract. That is why when you negotiate a contract, you agree on things which you think you can do. You don't agree on something you think, okay, maybe I can do. You need to be very clear what you're getting into, because the consequences sometimes can be very, very serious. And I've in my experience seen where in cases people have ended up paying crores of rupees because of not performing something. And had they performed, they would have probably been much better off. And added to that, the court will always award an interest on the amount which they are awarding as compensation. Therefore, the liability can be very huge. We discussed on non-performance and liability. This is on the, you were talking about what happens if one person is in Chennai and one person is in Mumbai. So although I was planning to talk to you about is alternate dispute resolution. But to answer your question, typically, in a contract, if there is a dispute, you have to go to a court unless you have a clause which says that you can opt for some other methods. So normal rule is that wherever the defendant has its office, that is where you will file a case. So if I am in Chennai and both of us agree, you are in Mumbai, we agreed that whatever contract we had. If I am the person who is filing the case, then I will have to come to Mumbai. That's the normal rule. That is the place of business of the party that you are suing. There is yet another concept called the cause of action. So when you say cause of action, action is the case that you're filing, the suit that you're filing. What is the cause for that? So a cause of action can be various things. Normally it is various things. It could be the contract that you signed. So if in that case, although your business is in Bombay and I'm supplying to you something in Bombay for manufacturing something there, but if we had sat in Chennai and signed the contract, a part of the cause of action has happened in Chennai. Then I have the option of filing either in Chennai, provided I'm able to show that a part of the cause of action has happened in Chennai, or I go to Mumbai and file the case. So that is to answer your question. But my slide is on a slightly different issue of alternate means of resolving dispute. To start with, no business should end up being in a dispute situation because it is very frustrating. But invariably you will find that, in long term you will find that business, when you're doing business, you will find a situation where you enter into a contract, it was a bad bargain, you end up having a counterparty who's not very cordial, you end up in a dispute situation. So because you are entering into a contract, you can avoid going to court. Because normally a dispute you go to court. In a court what happens, of course, the court system itself, there is a lot of delays and all that. It's like you have to get into the witness box, it's all happening in the open, people are seeing, so nobody likes that. Right? If you're a businessman at the end of the day, why would you be spending hours together in court? So there are alternate means of resolving dispute, and two of those are, one is a mediation and the other is arbitration. So in a mediation what happens is, there is a neutral third party who sits with both the parties, and this third party doesn't decide for them. He doesn't say you are right or you are right. That third party only helps both the parties to find a solution. So basically in a mediation, the parties who are having differences or disputes, they find a solution for their dispute. The third party only brings them together. So how it works is, if I am the mediator and both of you have some differences, I try to tell you his perspective of things, and I tell you his perspective, and then I'll try to say, look at from his point of view, if you were in his position, what would have happened? And then narrow down the differences and come to a point where both parties say, okay, it's more like a win-win situation. Now, what is most important in a mediation is both parties will have to agree for mediation. Without agreement, you can't say, I want to mediate. So long, unless you agree with me, it can't happen. The biggest advantage of mediation is that the relationship continues. Otherwise you will find if parties get into a dispute in a court situation, the relationship, just goes apart. Your lawyers are involved, you're calling each other names, you don't, in a business you don't want a situation like that. Today you would have, for whatever reason, have had differences. 5 years down the line, you would want to do the same business with the same party. So you would want to avoid that. So mediation is a very good way of resolving disputes. It's something which is catching up in our country. It's very popular in the Western countries. In the US, biggest of disputes are settled by mediation, and when I say settled by mediation, the whole thing happens in one day. So they are in dispute. So I was talking to one of the trained mediators. He was saying he was in the US for one of the training sessions. He said it was a huge stock exchange dispute. They sat in a hotel room, started at 8 a.m., ended at 12 p.m. in the night, but they closed it. They closed it, they shook hands, and they walked away. I mean, it's, I think, unbelievable to close disputes. I have seen, although I have not directly been involved, but I have seen, in India, in our country, in our own state, employer-employee relationship, going sour, and then I've seen mediation bringing them together and they parting ways happily. So mediation is something which is very important for businesses. There are a few people who do that here, but two things are important. Like I said, both the parties will have to completely agree. The other is the trust, that you should have a trust in the third party who is involved. The moment you think, oh, he's trying to take the other person's side, then it won't work. And in a mediation, you always have an option to walk out. So if you think that this is not happening, you can always walk out. So when you're doing a contract, although I said that you should have some of the essential things like termination and all that, it's always nice if the other party agrees to have a mediation clause saying that in case there is a dispute between us, we will opt to go for mediation. Now, if the mediation doesn't work, then you can always go back to the court system, or you have an option of what is called an arbitration. In an arbitration, what happens is almost the same thing that happens in a court will happen, but this is happening in front of a person who is appointed by the two parties. So you can have a contract saying that, the arbitration is very helpful where it is a very technical contract. Say it's an accounting dispute. So you take it to a judge, you're not very sure whether the judge understands accounts or not. But if you have an arbitration clause saying that in the event of a dispute, we will refer our dispute to Mr. So-and-so, you can name the person. He need not be a lawyer, he can be anybody, all that is required, he should be a person. So or for example, it's a construction contract, again engineering contract. You need to have somebody who understands the engineering aspects to it, because there could be technical aspects. So in an arbitration, you have the flexibility of having a person who has knowledge of that sector decide for you. And although it is like a court system, it's a closed door event. Only the person is there with the two parties. He may hear both sides and he may pass a verdict. But it's much more cordial atmosphere than in a court situation. Nobody gets into a witness box. Although you can be asked questions and all that, but it's a very, very, very cordial atmosphere. So that again, not as much as mediation, but to a large extent, that again for a business, arbitration is very helpful. In fact, nowadays I wouldn't think there is any commercial contract which doesn't have an arbitration clause. Almost every contract goes for arbitration if there is a dispute. So that is as far as the resolving of disputes is concerned. I just hope that none of you ever end in a dispute situation, but if it does, you have an alternate to courts. So that is all that I have as for today. So if there are any questions, yeah.
Startup company, two partners are there. Generally, two founders are there. One is technically very sound, another one brings money. He doesn't know anything about technicals. But they have like 50-50. So suppose the business fails. Okay. So the person who is technically, they will be, most likely he will be held responsible that it failed, suppose. And the person who put money and he is saying that no, because you told me that this business will work, that's why I put my money. So he is founder. So in that situation, whether the technical person is liable to give money back to that person?
Unless there is an agreement to that effect.
Okay. So means it is 50-50%. So as much as he is responsible for failure,
it's risk and reward. So
it is like both are equally.
It will typically be like a partnership. In a partnership, you take the reward as well as you take the risk.
Yeah, because I was talking to some.
Unless your contract says that there could be a contract which says that there is a target to be achieved, and the technical person assures the financial person that I will achieve this target.
But it should be written.
Yeah, it has to be
If it
written.
is not
Otherwise,
written,
there is.
then it is like both are equally responsible.
Yeah, it's what you agree. If you have not agreed on that, there is no way you can make the technical person responsible.
Is there any advantage of using a stamp paper? Because a lot of vendors just get scared the moment they see a stamp paper. When do you use, or why is it even required?
So stamp paper becomes relevant if somebody says that it is not a valid contract. So the whole purpose of stamp paper is paying the revenue to the state government. So like I said, emails are recognized as contracts. But the moment you put it in writing and you want to sign, both parties sign, then the court would expect that it is on a stamp paper. But they don't take it seriously unless somebody takes an objection saying that, look, this is not even a contract in the eye of law. Then there is a remedy to it. What you can do is the court has a power to impound the document, send it for stamping. The whole process can take some time, 6 months, 10 months sometimes. But the advantage is only that.
No, but this also I have questions because we sent in normal Word file, and then we took a printout, we signed. But the company don't know this document doesn't have any value. You have to sign only on stamp paper, then only it holds correct. Is it true or no?
I mean, if it's a simple contract, as I said, if you can do a contract on an email, how do you put in a stamp paper then?
But they told like that.
So when you're signing, that's what I say. If you're signing that document, if you print it out and you sign, both sides are signing, then it is better it is on a stamp paper. But an email, obviously both parties cannot sign.
So what is the difference between just taking the printout and signing each party signing, or rather than in
Suppose you have a contract which is not on a stamp paper, it's on a white sheet of paper, and you have a dispute with the other side. And then you go to court and say that, look, this is a contract on which I want to rely on. The other side can take a defense saying that this is not a valid contract because it has not been stamped as per the stamp law, which basically means that you have not paid the revenue, stamp revenue to the government. So it's at best a delaying tactics, because like I said, the court has the power to say, okay, this is an unstamped document, I will impound that document. The process is called impounding of document. The court will impound the document, send it to the collector for verifying how much stamp duty and penalty because it is not stamped on that date is levied, and then you will have to pay that money, and then you can bring it back.
both type of documents is valid.
Yeah.
So talking about email acceptance, say I am a service provider and I have an issue that usually it takes time to convert an order from a particular client. When legal terms are coming in, it takes even more time. So if I say instead of giving the client an agreement to sign, what I say, is it valid if I put some terms in my signature of an email? Like, so upon acceptance of the particular purchase order or something, he is also by law enforced that he is following these terms also, that is being in the signature of my email or a bottom line of my email.
No, I didn't.
Like say, I have an issue that I feel like it takes more time if I bring in agreements. Instead of signing NDAs every single time for every client order, I put certain 2 or 3 clauses in the bottom of my email as a signature, below my signature. Will that work?
It may not work because if you're putting it somewhere where a person can easily skip, I don't normally find if it's an email which I receive from some person on a daily basis, on a regular basis, I don't look below the signature, right? So then it's like trying to insert something which you don't want. That may not work. But
in the bottom of the body of the email, if I have it,
in the body of the email, you say that, and you see, ultimately the question would be whether he has accepted or not. So if you say that these are the clauses, and say that if it is acceptable, please confirm, and if he confirms, that's the best case scenario. Otherwise, whether he has accepted or not, whether his silence can be treated or not, can go either way. I mean, normally, as I said, there can be in situations there can be acceptance by silence, but not in all cases. There could be some situation where silence doesn't mean that you have accepted.
It's a contract about the law. Like, let's say if I'm signing an agreement with the employee, and he has promised something, I'm doing this in the job. So let's say by the end of 1 month, I'm not happy with the employee and I want to break the agreement. And as per the agreement, I have to give 3 months notice. Can he enforce me that okay, you have to work for 3 months, even though I'm not interested in can he enforce it?
So what he can get is the answer is yes, but you need not work for him for 3 months, but instead of that you can pay him compensation for not having worked for those 3 months.
No, like let's say they have given me some work and I'm doing the particular work and it's not they are not even following it up properly and they are even forcing me to work even more harder for them. So I'm not satisfied with the work that I'm doing. So that I have to leave that work. So let's say it's physically hurting me and I have to go. So anyway.
So if it's physically hurting and all, then it's a different thing altogether.
Basically in terms of like, let's say join a contract with my employee and they say you should not take leaves on Sunday and you should not take on festivals, you should work 24 hours and like it's not written in the document. We start the work and they'll ask, okay, you have to finish this work. There is no other way. You have to work. And they're enforcing it.
What you're saying is basically an unfair term in an employment contract. You will have other recourse of going to authorities and complaining because there are statutory requirements of having holidays and all that. You can complain against that. There is a Shops and Establishments Act authority and all that.
So even though we are in a contract, there is a law to protect me.
Yes, yes. So,
we are giving services, providing services to the customers or users. They are like huge numbers, 20,000. So whenever we change the terms and conditions of our services, we keep it in our common portal. It doesn't mind, like we have to send it through an email to everybody or sending a notification to them, to every individual. Is it necessary?
It would be necessary because not everybody would have seen what is there in your portal.
But anyway, it's there in our terms and conditions or privacy content in our common portal.
So you're saying all of them use your portal, is it? And they access it and...
They also have the access.
Then it's okay. Then it's deemed to...
Change the terms and conditions, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, so every time they click on accept, right?
Okay, we have to send a copy.
Yeah. Because if you have changed it and they have not accepted the changed conditions, then there is no acceptance. So if you are changing it, you have to alert them that the terms and conditions have changed, and then they will have to accept it again.
For people that we discussed who were skeptical about signing contracts, we put an audio or a video recording we use as a contract. Like we're dealing with an individual who we depend on.
See, it will help, but if you are taking that video recording without his consent, it is affecting his right to privacy. With consent, yes, because you can have a verbal contract. Video recording will only prove your verbal contract. You can. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, sir, on integration cell and I would also like to thank the alumni and members for arranging and supporting us in this day. So here's a small token of appreciation. Lastly, thank you all for coming in as well. We'll be informing you on the next step. Thank you.
Thank you. It was very interactive and a lot of questions. Made it more.